When I was 17, my parents kicked me out of the house for getting my girlfriend pregnant. I had nothing, no money, no home, no family. 22 years later, when I'd finally built my life from the ground up, they showed up on my doorstep, trembling and desperate. My father's first words were, "We've come to see the child." And when I told them, "What child? What are you talking about?" their faces turned pale. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because what you're about to hear will make you question what family truly means. My name is Lucas Henderson, and I'm 38 years old. If you met me today, you'd probably see an ordinary guy, a man with calloused hands, a well-worn leather jacket, and a quiet kind of confidence. I own a small construction company in upstate New York. My team's like family to me. I've got a modest house, a loyal dog named Ranger, and a garage that smells like coffee and sawdust. To most people, I look like someone who's had his life figured out for a long time. But the truth is, it took me 22 years to get here. And every nail I've hammered, every wall I've built, every sleepless night I've worked through, it all came from one moment that shattered my world back when I was just 17. Back then, I lived in a quiet, conservative town where everyone knew everyone. The kind of place where reputation meant everything, and the church's bell dictated the rhythm of life. My father, Robert Henderson, was one of those men everyone respected but few truly liked. He ran a local auto parts store, attended every Sunday service, and believed in hard work, discipline, and appearances above all else. My mother, Evelyn, was softer. She had gentle eyes and a voice that could calm storms, but she rarely went against my father's word. Her life revolved around keeping peace in the house, keeping him calm, and keeping me in line. I was their only child, the one who was supposed to carry the Henderson name, go to college, make them proud. And for a long time, I tried. I really did. But even as a kid, I always felt like I didn't belong in that house. My father was a man who thought love was weakness and emotion was something you get over. When I brought home a B on my report card, he'd just stare at it and say, "Could have been an A." When I made the varsity baseball team, he didn't say, "Good job." He said, "Don't screw it up." Looking back, I think I spent most of my childhood chasing a nod from him that never came. When I turned 17, I started working weekends at a local gas station. It wasn't much, but it gave me freedom, my own money, my own space, my own small slice of control. That's where life changed forever. That's where I met Mia Carter. But before I tell you about Mia and how she became the center of everything, you have to understand what kind of person I was at that time. I wasn't a bad kid. I didn't drink, didn't skip school, didn't get into fights. But I was lonely. When you grow up in a house where silence feels heavier than words, you start craving someone who sees you, really sees you. Mia was that person. She transferred to our high school during junior year. She wasn't like the other girls, not the cheerleader type, not someone chasing popularity. She had dark brown hair that always fell into her face when she laughed, and she loved sketching little things, trees, faces, clouds, on the margins of her notebooks. She wore thrift store sweaters and carried herself like she was always halfway lost in a dream. The first time we spoke, it was raining. I remember because her sketchbook got soaked, and I offered her my jacket. She looked up, smiled, and said, "You really think that jacket's gonna survive this downpour?" That smile, that was it. I was gone. We started talking after class, then walking home together, then spending weekends by the lake. She told me about her mom, a single mother who worked 2 jobs, and how she wanted to study art one day. I told her about my dad, and how I just wanted to get out of that town. It was easy, natural, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't have to pretend to be someone else. She wasn't just my girlfriend. She was home. For a few months, everything felt perfect, like life had finally given me something real. But life, as I'd soon learn, has a way of reminding you that happiness is fragile. The night everything changed, I remember the air smelled like pine and gasoline from the bonfire at the lake. We were 17, young, dumb, and full of dreams. And for one brief night, we let our hearts decide instead of our heads. It was supposed to be nothing more than another memory. But that memory came with consequences neither of us was ready for. A few weeks later, I got the call that changed everything. I was in my room, half asleep, when my phone buzzed. It was Mia. Her voice trembled through the receiver. "Lucas, I think I'm pregnant. Those words hit me like a freight train. The world stopped. I couldn't even breathe. My first instinct wasn't anger or fear. It was protection. I remember saying, "We'll figure this out. I promise. I'm not leaving you." And I meant it. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that this promise would be the very thing that tore my life apart. Because in our town, teenage love wasn't just a mistake, it was a sin. And my father was about to make sure I paid for it. That's where this story truly begins. Not with rebellion, not with a mistake, but with two scared kids who thought love could stand against everything. And as I stand here now, 22 years later, remembering that stormy night when my parents showed up asking to see the child, I realized that everything, every scar, every wall I built, every silence between us, started from that single phone call. Mia Carter changed my life long before she ever said the words, "I'm pregnant." She changed it the moment she smiled at me across that rain-soaked parking lot behind a gas station. At 17, love felt like something that only existed in songs, something older people reminisced about, but never truly explained. But with Mia, love wasn't fireworks or chaos. It was quiet. It was the way she listened when I talked about things no one else cared about. It was the way her eyes lit up when she talked about the future, about art, freedom, the ocean she'd never seen, but swore she'd live near someday. She was from the other side of town, the side people in my neighborhood looked down on. Her mother, Linda, worked at a diner, and they rented a small apartment above a hardware store. She didn't have much, but she had something I didn't: warmth. Whenever I was around Mia, I felt human. Our relationship started simple. Lunch breaks in the cafeteria. Late-night phone calls that stretched until sunrise. The kind of conversations where you confess things you've never said out loud. She told me her biggest fear was becoming like her mom, stuck in the same place forever. I told her my biggest fear was becoming like my dad, cold, angry, unfeeling. It wasn't long before we became inseparable. Teachers joked that if they saw one of us, the other couldn't be far behind. We studied together, worked on her art projects, and sometimes, when things at home got unbearable, I'd sneak out at night and drive to her place. We'd sit on the roof, listening to the hum of the highway, sharing a single blanket, dreaming about someday. I can still remember her laughter, soft and free. It made the rest of the world disappear. To me, Mia wasn't just a girlfriend. She was an escape hatch from a life that felt too small, too rigid, too controlled. With her, I could breathe. We talked about moving away after graduation, maybe heading west. I'd get a job in construction, she'd go to art school, and we'd make it work somehow. We were naive, sure, but back then, that naivety was beautiful. Our love grew fast, maybe too fast. There was a sense of urgency, like we both knew the world wouldn't let us stay in that bubble forever. We'd sneak out on Friday nights to the lake just outside town, our secret place. There was an old pier there, falling apart at the edges, and we'd sit for hours with our feet dangling over the water, talking about everything and nothing. One night, she showed me a sketchbook filled with drawings of us. Little moments she'd captured. Me fixing her car, her holding my baseball glove, us laughing in the rain. She said, "If I ever forget who I am, I want to look at this and remember that someone once loved me exactly as I was." I told her, "Then I'll make sure you never forget." That was the night we first said I love you. It wasn't planned. It just slipped out, honest and raw. And in that moment, I believed it was forever. Weeks later, it happened. That night at the lake, under the stars. The air smelled of pine, and everything felt too real, too fragile. We weren't reckless, not at first. But when you're 17 and in love, logic fades. You think love is enough to shield you from the consequences. I remember driving her home afterward, holding her hand the entire way. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Promise me, no matter what happens, we'll always be us." I promised, without hesitation. For a while, life went on as usual. School, work, late-night talks. She seemed a little quieter, a little more distant, but I assumed she was just tired. Then one afternoon, she didn't show up for class. I called. No answer. Texted. Nothing. That evening, when my phone finally rang, I saw her name on the screen. I smiled, until I heard her voice. It was trembling. Fragile. "Lucas, I think I'm pregnant." Everything around me blurred. The walls, the floor, the air. I remember sitting down hard on my bed, my mind racing through every possible outcome, every lie I could tell my father, every plan I could make to keep her safe. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just said, okay, we'll figure this out. She broke down crying. I'm scared, Lucas. My mom's gonna kill me. She barely pays rent as it is. I don't know what to do. Hey, I said softly, trying to sound braver than I felt. You're not alone. I'll get another job. I'll help. I'll talk to your mom if I have to. We'll handle this together. But I was lying to myself. Because deep down, I knew our town, our parents, our lives, none of it would ever forgive us. The following days felt like walking through fog. I couldn't focus at school. Every time my dad looked at me, I felt like he knew. I'd sneak glances at Mia across the hallway, and she'd give me that small, nervous smile, the kind that said we're in this together even though neither of us knew how. We started planning, saving a little money from my gas station job, talking about maybe running away after graduation. We even looked up small apartments in nearby towns, dreaming about raising a baby together, scared but hopeful. But fate didn't give us a chance. One night, Mia's mother found the pregnancy test hidden under her bed. Everything fell apart after that. Her mother stormed into my father's store the next morning, shouting, accusing, crying. By the time I got home from school, my father was waiting in the kitchen, his face pale with fury. That's when the shouting started. The day everything exploded started like any other. I remember walking home from school, the air thick with the smell of freshly cut grass and gasoline. Kids were laughing, cars passing, life moving on like nothing was wrong. But inside, I could feel something brewing. When I reached the front door, I knew. My father's truck was already in the driveway, earlier than usual. Inside, the house was silent, that kind of silence that screams. My mother stood by the counter, wringing her hands, eyes red from crying. My father was sitting at the kitchen table, jaw clenched, his face pale and cold. He didn't say hello. He didn't even look at me. He just said, sit down. The next words out of his mouth made my stomach drop. Mia's mother came by today. That's when I knew the secret was gone. He slammed his hand on the table so hard the plates rattled. Do you have any idea what you've done? I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. My throat was tight, my chest burning. Pregnant? He roared. You've disgraced this family, Lucas. Do you realize what people will say about us? My mother started sobbing. Robert, please, she whispered. But he wasn't listening. His voice just kept getting louder, the anger feeding on itself. You've thrown away your future for some girl who couldn't keep her legs closed. Don't talk about her like that. I shouted before I could stop myself. The room froze. His eyes went wild. I'd never yelled at him before. He stood up so fast his chair slammed into the wall. For a second, I thought he might actually hit me. Get out, he said, his voice low and dangerous. What? You heard me. Get out of my house. You're not my son anymore. Dad, don't call me that. My mother tried to step between us, clutching his arm. Robert, please, he's just a boy. But he shoved her hand away. He's made his choice. Let him live with it. I begged. I told him I'd fix it, that I'd finish school, that I'd work 2 jobs if I had to. He didn't care. To him, I wasn't his son anymore. I was a stain he wanted scrubbed out of existence. When I realized there was no changing his mind, I ran to my room. I grabbed a duffel bag, threw in a few shirts, my wallet, a photo of me and my mom from when I was 10, and I left. As I stepped outside, rain began to fall. Fitting, I thought. My father didn't follow. My mother stood at the door, crying silently. I could see she wanted to say something, but fear held her back. That was the last image I had of her for over 2 decades, her small frame framed by the doorway, trembling under the porch light. I walked for hours that night, aimless, numb. I ended up at the bus stop near the diner. I didn't know where to go, so I sat there, soaked, shaking, thinking about Mia. When I finally found her, she was crying too. Her mother had told her they were leaving town, moving in with relatives a few hours away. I'm sorry, Lucas, she said through tears. She says I can't see you again. I grabbed her hand. We'll figure something out, I whispered. I'll call you, I'll visit. But she shook her head. She took my phone. She's making me pack tonight. I didn't know what to say. We hugged for a long time, both of us crying into the cold night air. I told her I loved her. She said it back. And then she was gone. The next morning, I came back to my parents' house to try one last time. The locks had been changed. My father had already thrown my things into a trash bag, and left it on the porch. No note. No goodbye. For the next few weeks, I slept on friends' couches. Some nights, in my truck behind the gas station. I went back to work, trying to save money, trying to figure out how to contact Mia. I wrote letters, one every week, but none were answered. I didn't know if she got them, or if her mom tore them up. I even went by her old apartment once, but it was empty. Gone. Just like that. Days turned into weeks, then months. I got my GED through night school because I couldn't finish high school after being kicked out. I worked full-time at the mechanic's shop, kept my head down, tried to stay alive. But no matter how hard I worked, I couldn't stop wondering, what happened to her? What happened to our baby? Every time I saw a mother pushing a stroller, my heart twisted. Every time I passed a house with a family laughing inside, I felt like an outsider in my own world. I sent one last letter to Mia that year. No return address, just my name and a plea. Please tell me you're okay. I never heard back. And eventually, I stopped trying. Not because I didn't care, but because life doesn't give you the luxury to keep bleeding forever. You learn to seal the wound and keep moving. My father never reached out. Not once. My mother sent a Christmas card 2 years later, and signed, no message, just Merry Christmas, printed in gold letters. I kept it in my wallet until it faded. It was strange. The more time passed, the easier it was to pretend the past never happened. But deep down, it was still there, buried like a landmine waiting to explode. And 22 years later, it did. Because one quiet Saturday morning, when I thought the past was finally dead and buried, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, the ghosts of everything I'd tried to forget were standing right there. My parents, older, gray-haired, trembling. And my father's first words were, "We've come to see the child." It was a quiet Saturday morning. One of those calm days where the air feels lighter than usual, the kind that makes you forget life ever hurt you. I was in my garage, working on an old Chevy that needed a new alternator. The radio was playing soft country music, the kind that fills empty spaces without asking for attention. Ranger, my dog, was lying near the workbench, snoring softly. Everything was peaceful, ordinary. Then I heard it. A knock. 3 steady, hesitant knocks. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe a delivery, or a client stopping by early. I wiped my hands on a rag and walked toward the front door. But when I opened it, I froze. Standing there, in the pale light of morning, were my parents. My father's once black hair was now almost entirely gray, thinner at the sides. His posture wasn't as rigid as I remembered. The man who'd once looked indestructible now looked old. My mother stood beside him, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. For a few seconds, none of us said a word. The world seemed to hold its breath. Finally, my father spoke. His voice was gravelly, low, uncertain. "Lucas, we've come to see the child." The words hit me like a slap. "The what?" I said slowly, thinking I'd misheard. He straightened a little, trying to gather the authority he used to carry so easily. "The child. Your child. The one you had with Mia Carter." For a moment, I genuinely thought this was some kind of cruel joke. I stared at him, speechless. "What child?" I said finally. "What are you talking about?" My mother took a shaky step forward. "Lucas, please. Don't pretend. We just want to see our grandchild. We know everything now." My heart began to pound. "Grandchild," I repeated. "You kicked me out 22 years ago, remember? You didn't care what happened back then. So what makes you think?" My voice cracked before I could finish. My mother started crying softly. "We're sorry," she whispered. "We were wrong. We should have been there for you. We should have believed in you." But I couldn't focus on her words. I was stuck on that one phrase, "See the child." There was no child. There had never been a child. I stepped aside slowly, motioning for them to come in. My father hesitated, glancing at the house like it was enemy territory, but finally followed my mother inside. The air in the living room grew heavy with tension. My father sat down stiffly on the couch, while my mother wandered around, touching the photo frames on the mantel. Pictures of me, my coworkers, and Ranger. No wife. No kids. "Where is she?" my mother asked softly. "Mia?" I sighed. "I don't know. I haven't seen her since the day you threw me out." That answer seemed to surprise them. My father frowned. "You mean, you haven't been in touch? You didn't raise the child?" I stared at him in disbelief. "What child, Dad?" I said again, my voice sharper now. "There wasn't one." He looked confused, genuinely confused. his brow furrowed, and for the first time in my life, I saw something that looked almost like doubt in his eyes. My mother sat down, wringing her hands. "Lucas, your father told me not to reach out to you. We thought you and Mia ran away together, that you had the baby and started a new life somewhere." I shook my head slowly. "No, that never happened. She left town with her mother. I never saw her again." My father leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Then why?" He trailed off, his mouth tightening. The silence between us stretched painfully. The clock on the wall ticked like thunder. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice trembling. "A few weeks ago, we saw someone. A woman who used to live near Mia's mother. She told us that Mia did have the baby, that she went to the hospital, and that you—" She stopped to swallow hard. "You weren't there." I blinked, stunned. "That's not possible," I whispered. "She never told me." My father looked at me sharply. "Are you saying you didn't know?" My mind was spinning. I could feel my pulse in my throat. "No, I didn't know. She never told me anything." My father leaned back, the confusion in his eyes slowly morphing into something else, guilt. My mother began crying harder. "Oh God," she murmured. "What have we done?" I just stood there, frozen. It didn't make sense. If Mia had the baby, why hadn't she called me? Why hadn't she answered my letters? Unless she couldn't. And in that moment, a thought hit me so hard it almost knocked the air out of my lungs. What if my parents had done something back then, something that stopped her from reaching me? I turned toward them slowly. "You knew she came to you, didn't you?" I said, voice shaking. "After you kicked me out, she came to see you." My father's eyes darted away. My mother's shoulders started shaking. "Lucas, tell me," I shouted. "Yes," she whispered finally. "She came to us. She was scared, pregnant, begging for help. But your father—" She broke down completely. He refused to see her. "I gave her some money, told her to go start over somewhere safe. I wanted to tell you, but he wouldn't let me." The room spun. I sat down hard, feeling the ground tilt beneath me. 22 years of silence suddenly had a sound, the sound of betrayal. All those years wondering why she'd never written back, why she disappeared. It wasn't her fault. It was theirs. I looked at my father, who now sat in silence, his jaw tight, his eyes glistening with something that looked an awful lot like regret. But it was too late. Too damn late. "You destroyed everything," I said quietly. "You took away my chance to be a father. You made me hate myself for nothing." My father opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "Don't. Just don't." For the first time, he didn't argue. He just sat there, defeated. After a long, heavy silence, my mother whispered, "Lucas, we came here today because we thought maybe you and Mia had raised that baby. We wanted to make things right. We wanted to meet our grandchild." I stared at them both, my voice hollow. "What grandchild?" That question hung in the air like smoke. Because if Mia truly had the baby, and I never knew, then somewhere out there, a part of me had lived an entire life without me. For a moment, the room was dead silent. Only the ticking clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator filled the air between us. My mind was spinning, trying to catch up with what my mother had just said. She had given Mia money. She had turned her away. And my father had forbidden her from telling me anything. 22 years of silence, explained in one confession. I leaned back in my chair, staring at them both, my hands trembling. "So you're telling me, she came here. She tried to tell me. And you sent her away?" My mother's chin quivered. "Your father thought it was for the best. He was afraid of what people would say." "What people would say?" I snapped. "You ruined 2 lives because you cared about gossip?" My father looked down, his hands gripping his knees. "I did what I thought was right at the time." "At the time?" I laughed bitterly. "At the time, you threw your own son out like trash. You made me believe I'd lost everything. You made me hate myself." He said nothing. The man who'd spent his entire life being louder than everyone else suddenly had no words. My mother whispered, "We were wrong. Both of us. We know that now." I wanted to yell, to scream, but the anger burned out halfway up my throat. All that came out was exhaustion, 22 years worth of it. "Why are you here now?" I asked, my voice flat. "Why after all this time?" My father finally spoke, his tone low and cautious. "Because," he said, "a few weeks ago, someone told us that Mia didn't lose the baby like we were led to believe." I froze. "Lose the baby?" He nodded slowly. "After you left, we heard from her mother about 6 months later. She said Mia had a miscarriage. We believed it. I felt my stomach drop. You believed it? My mother's eyes filled again. Lucas, I wanted to go to her, but your father said no. He said it was better this way. We thought it was over. And now? I asked. She reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out a crumpled envelope. She slid it across the table toward me. Now, someone told us that wasn't true. I stared at it for a long time before finally opening it. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a letter, old and yellowed around the edges. The handwriting hit me like a memory. Mia's handwriting. It read, Mrs. Henderson, please tell Lucas I had the baby. I know he's probably angry with me for leaving, but I didn't have a choice. My mom says it's better if I move away. I'm naming him Ethan. I just wanted Lucas to know he has a son. My vision blurred. I set the letter down carefully, afraid it would crumble in my hands. She wrote this. I whispered. My mother nodded, crying silently. She gave it to me. I never told you. Your father said it would only make things worse. I stared at them, my heart pounding. You kept this from me? For 22 years. My father rubbed his face, his voice breaking for the first time in my life. I thought I was protecting you. You were 17. You had no money, no education. I didn't want you ruining your life raising a child. I slammed my hand on the table. That wasn't your choice to make. My voice echoed through the house, bouncing off the walls I'd built myself, the ones they'd never stepped inside until now. My father looked like a man who'd finally realized the weight of his sins. After a long, heavy silence, my mother whispered, We thought we'd never find out what happened. But a woman we know from town, she used to work at the clinic where Mia gave birth, told us that Mia had a healthy baby boy. He was adopted not long after. I stared at her. Adopted? She nodded. Mia was only 18. Her mother insisted. She said it was best for everyone. I could barely breathe. Does Mia know where he is? My mother shook her head. We don't know. That woman didn't have much information. Just that he was adopted by a family in the same state. She said the records were sealed. The room tilted around me. Ethan, my son, a name I never got to choose, a face I'd never seen. I stood up and walked to the window, trying to steady myself. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning to fade, painting everything in gold. I thought about the 17-year-old kid I used to be, scared, desperate, lost, and how that boy had been robbed of his chance to know his own child. And then, as if on cue, guilt twisted inside me. What if I'd tried harder? What if I'd gone looking for Mia sooner? What if I hadn't given up? I turned back toward them. Why are you telling me this now? My father's eyes were glassy, his voice hoarse. Because we're old, Lucas. We don't have much time left. And before we go, we want to make things right, as much as we can. We thought maybe you'd found him. Maybe you'd raised him. I laughed bitterly. No, Dad. I didn't raise him. I didn't even know he existed. My mother reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I lost everything because of you, I said quietly. Do you understand that? My future, my family, my son. Tears streamed down her face. I know, and we can't undo that. But please, Lucas, if there's any chance he's out there, maybe you can find him. I stood there, speechless. For so long, I'd buried the past. I'd convinced myself that Mia had moved on, that maybe she'd chosen to forget me. But now, everything I believed was wrong. There was a boy out there, a man now, who might share my blood, my name, my smile. And all I could think about was the way my father had once said, You're not my son. And now, somewhere out there, there was another version of me, another life, that might never know I existed either. When my parents finally left that evening, the house felt heavier than ever. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the letter from Mia in my hands, reading it over and over until the ink started to blur from my tears. Ethan, my son, that night, I made myself a promise. I would find out the truth, all of it. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mia's handwriting. I'm naming him Ethan. The words burned into my mind like a brand. For 22 years, I'd lived with the belief that my story ended at 17, a foolish kid cast out of his home, abandoned by the girl he loved. But now I realized that wasn't the ending. It was just the part my parents decided I was allowed to know. When morning came, I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of cold coffee in my hands, staring at the letter. I knew what I had to do. I had to find her. I started with the obvious, social media. I typed Mia Carter into every platform I could think of. Hundreds of results popped up. None of them her. Different faces, different towns. But after hours of searching, I found one that stopped me cold. A woman named Mia Wilson, formerly Carter, living in Pennsylvania. The profile picture was of an art gallery, a small, independent one called The Painted Leaf. I clicked through the photos. There she was. Older, her hair streaked with silver, her smile softer but unmistakably her. My heart started pounding. I hesitated for almost an hour before sending a message. It was simple. Mia, I don't know if you'll remember me. It's Lucas. Then I waited. Hours passed. Nothing. Days went by, still nothing. Then, one night, just as I was about to give up, I saw the little notification. She replied, Lucas, I never thought I'd hear from you again. We agreed to meet the following weekend. She lived 4 hours away in a small town just outside Pittsburgh. I drove the whole way in silence, my mind racing with questions. When I finally pulled up to the gallery, it was raining, just like the first time we met. Through the window, I saw her. Mia. She looked different, but the same in all the ways that mattered. Her eyes still carried that quiet strength, the same look she had when she told me she was pregnant all those years ago. When I walked in, she froze. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she smiled, tears already welling up. Hi, Lucas. I laughed softly, my voice cracking. Hey. We sat down in the corner of the small cafe attached to the gallery. For a long time, we just stared at each other, unsure where to start. Finally, she took a deep breath. I guess you found out, she said. Yeah, I whispered. My parents came by. She nodded, her eyes darkening. I figured. I didn't know if they'd ever tell you. I shook my head. They didn't. Not until last week. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her cup. I tried, Lucas. I really did. I came to your house. Your father wouldn't see me. Your mother cried and gave me money. I thought, maybe you didn't want to see me. My throat tightened. Mia, I wrote to you. Dozens of letters. She looked at me, shocked. I never got them. My mom must have intercepted them. We sat there in silence, letting the weight of everything unsaid fill the space between us. 2 decades of misunderstandings, of lives lived apart, of pain that never healed. Finally, she whispered, I had him. A boy. Ethan. Hearing the name from her lips made it real in a way the letter never could. He was perfect, she said, smiling faintly through her tears. Tiny fingers, big brown eyes. He looked just like you, Lucas. I felt something crack open inside me. Where is he now? Her expression softened, then broke. I don't know. She explained how her mother forced her into an adoption program. She was 18, broke, and terrified. They told me it was for his own good, that he'd have a better life. They wouldn't even let me hold him for more than a few minutes. My chest ached. You didn't deserve that. Neither did you, she said quietly. I wanted to tell you, but after what your father said to me, I didn't think you'd want to hear from me again. We both fell silent again. I looked at her hands, still stained faintly with paint, and realized she had carried that pain alone all these years. I reached across the table and took her hand. We can still find him, Mia. Together. She looked up at me, surprised. You'd want that. Of course I would, I said. He's my son, too. For the first time in over 2 decades, she smiled. Not the polite kind, but the kind that came from hope. Over the next few weeks, Mia and I worked side by side like detectives in an old movie. We contacted the adoption agency, filled out paperwork, searched every public record we could access. It wasn't easy. Most of the files were sealed, and privacy laws made everything slow. But we kept pushing. We even met with one of the nurses who'd worked at the hospital back then. She remembered Mia, the girl with the sketchbook. She cried the whole time, the nurse said softly. Didn't want to let go of the baby. That night, Mia and I sat in my truck in the hospital parking lot, rain tapping against the windshield, both of us lost in thought. I used to dream about him, she said quietly. I'd imagine he had your eyes. That maybe he'd grow up to build things, like you. I smiled faintly. I always thought he never existed. She nodded. Funny how the truth can hurt just as much as the lie. Weeks passed, and then one day, a letter came from the agency. They couldn't release identifying information, but they confirmed something. Ethan had been adopted by a family in Albany, New York. He'd grown up healthy, graduated college, doing well. That was all they could tell us. Mia and I sat in silence as we read it, tears blurring the words. He was alive. He was okay. It wasn't closure, but it was enough to breathe again. I'm glad, she said, smiling through tears. He got the life we couldn't give him. I nodded, holding the letter. And maybe that's enough. Over the next few months, Mia and I grew close again, not as lovers, but as something deeper. Two people bound by a wound only they could understand. She told me she'd never married. No one ever felt right after you, she said softly one evening. Maybe that's my fault. I told her about my life, the business, the house, the loneliness. She smiled and said, "You always were a builder, Lucas. Even when your world fell apart, you built yourself back up." It felt like forgiveness. Before I left that night, she hugged me and whispered, "If you ever find him, tell him I loved him. Always." I drove home in silence, the rain following me the whole way. When I got back, I sat in the driveway for a long time, thinking about Mia, about Ethan, about all the years we'd lost. Some stories don't get happy endings, just the truth, finally set free. But for the first time in 22 years, I didn't feel angry. I felt peace. It had been nearly 6 months since I'd found Mia, since we'd discovered the truth about Ethan, since I'd learned that everything I'd believed about my past was built on a lie someone else decided was for the best. Life had started to settle again, but in a different way. Not the quiet numbness I'd lived with for years. This time, it was peace mixed with clarity. For the first time, I understood who I was, where I'd come from, and what I'd lost. But there was one thing left to do. One conversation I couldn't avoid forever. It was a Sunday afternoon when I invited my parents over. The sky was soft and gray, the kind of weather that always makes people quieter. I'd called them 2 days earlier, told them we needed to talk, really talk, and to my surprise, they agreed. I didn't tell them Mia had contacted me. I didn't tell them about the letter from the agency. I just said, "Come by. There's something I want to tell you." When they arrived, my father looked smaller than ever. His once commanding posture had been replaced by a slow, deliberate shuffle. My mother clutched her purse like it was a shield. They sat down on the same couch where, months earlier, they'd confessed everything. My father cleared his throat. "Did you find her?" "Mia." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I found her." My mother leaned forward, her voice trembling. "And the baby?" I took a deep breath. "He was born. Healthy." She named him Ethan. Her eyes filled instantly. "Oh, thank God. And where is he now? Can we see him?" That was the moment. The line I'd waited 22 years to say, not out of cruelty, but out of truth. I looked at them both, calm, steady. "What child?" I said softly. "What are you talking about?" Their faces went pale. My father blinked, confused. My mother looked like she'd been slapped. "Lucas," she started, but I cut her off gently. "No," I said. "You don't get to see him. You don't get to ask about him. Because he doesn't belong to us. Not anymore." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The quiet was louder than any shout could ever be. "You took that away from me," I continued. "From him. From Mia. You made decisions that weren't yours to make, and we all paid the price. That boy grew up without me, without knowing who his father was. And now, after all this time, you think you can just walk in and see the child?" My father's eyes glistened. I'd never seen him cry before. "I was wrong," he whispered. "God help me, I was wrong." I nodded. "Yeah, you were." My mother reached for my hand. "Lucas, please. We just want to make things right." I sighed. "You can't make it right, Mom. But you can live with it, the same way I did." She started crying again, soft and broken, while my father sat motionless, staring at the floor. I stood, walking to the window. Outside, the sun had dipped low, the light bleeding gold across the fields. I turned back to them, not with anger, but with finality. "I found Mia," I said. "We talked. She forgave you, even though she had every reason not to. And Ethan, he's doing well. He has a good family, a good life. He's happy. That's all that matters now." My mother whispered, "Do you ever think he'll want to meet you?" I looked down at the letter still sitting on my coffee table, the one that said his name, the only connection I had to him. "Maybe," I said softly. "And if he does, I'll be ready. But until then, I'm not chasing ghosts anymore." After they left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching them walk to their car. My father stopped halfway down the driveway and turned to look at me. For a split second, he seemed like the man I used to beg approval from. Strong, intimidating, impossible. But this time, I didn't feel small. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it, gave a slow nod, and got into the car. The engine started, and they drove away. And just like that, The storm that had been hanging over my life for 22 years was gone. I sat down on the porch steps, the evening wind brushing past me, carrying the faint scent of pine and rain. Ranger lay beside me, his head resting on my knee. I looked up at the sky and thought of Mia, the girl with the sketchbook, the only person who'd ever seen me for who I was before the world decided who I should be. 2 weeks later, I got a call from her gallery's assistant. Mia had passed away in her sleep after a short illness. Peacefully, they said. I drove to Pennsylvania that weekend, stood outside the Painted Leaf, and left a bouquet of wildflowers on the steps. There were no words, no speeches, just silence. And in that silence, I found the closure I'd been chasing for most of my life. As I drove home, I whispered, "He's okay, Mia. We did good." Now, some nights, I still find myself sitting by the window, wondering what Ethan's life looks like. Maybe he's got a family of his own now. Maybe he looks in the mirror and sees a face that feels familiar, though he doesn't know why. And maybe that's enough. Because sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't claiming what's yours. It's letting it go so it can live free from the pain that once created it. I used to think my parents' greatest sin was cruelty. Now I realize it was fear. Fear of shame, fear of judgment, fear of imperfection. And fear, I've learned, destroys more families than hate ever could. I don't hate them anymore, but I don't need them either. The boy they threw out all those years ago, he's gone. The man who stands here now, he built himself from the ruins. And that is enough. And that's my story. If you were in my shoes, if your parents showed up after decades asking to see the child they once made you give up, would you let them? Would you forgive them? Or close the door for good? Tell me in the comments below. I really want to know how you would handle it. If this story touched you, please hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means finally being free. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of your heart. Take care of your family. And remember, sometimes, walking away is the beginning of healing.